This is the all-new Mazda CX70. And if you're wondering where this sits in Mazda's lineup, let's actually think back to the Hondas that we drove recently. The Honda Passport from a couple weeks ago is a two-row version of the Honda Pilot, which is their three-row SUV. The difference here is the fact that the Passport is dimensionally shorter than the Honda Pilot, making it a little more maneuverable. The CX70, identical dimension-wise to the CX90. So why would you want a three-row SUV pretending to be a two-row SUV? Well, they did include some updates with the CX70 that are said to address some of the concerns that I had with the CX90 not too long ago. So we're going to achieve all of this today by taking a look outside. Inside, I'm going to show you some of the features and technology while also trying to cram a bike into the back of this thing. And last but not least, we're going to take it on the road to see what it's like to drive. We just mentioned some of the complaints with the CX90, but one thing we definitely didn't complain about with the CX90 was the way it looks. Excellent looking SUV, and the fact that the CX70 is essentially identical, of course, it's also a very good looking SUV. The difference here is going to be where there is chrome on the CX90, you basically get blacked out or painted pieces on the CX70. So this is meant to be a little more of that, maybe a slightly younger version with the black pieces and the painted pieces. Now, speaking of colors, this is called polymetal gray metallic, which is a sort of almost pearlized bluish gray. Actually a really beautiful color, similar to the CX90 that we have. It's hard to stand out color-wise today since companies are using such a wide color palette, but that beautiful purple color on the CX90 and now this really cool grayish blue is a nice way that Mazda is stepping out compared to the competition. When we pop the hood, we're greeted with one of the largest engine covers I have ever seen in my life. Mazda really doesn't want you seeing what's going on under here, now do they? It's actually a 3.3 liter turbocharged inline six engine, which is interesting. And in fact, this is sort of the party piece of this vehicle. Most inline six turbos are BMWs these days. So the fact that Mazda has one of these is kind of a big deal. And this one specifically makes 340 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. It's actually a mild hybrid, so it gets a bit of an electric boost to it. It's paired to an 8-speed transmission, and importantly, this is said to be updated tuning-wise compared to the CX90 version that I drove, which I did have some qualms with, so we'll be curious to see if it is in fact improved. Last thing, of course, to talk about is the fuel economy, 23 miles to the gallon city, 28 highway, although I will say I'm getting nowhere near those numbers. I'm getting quite a bit lower, although I do tend to find myself with a very heavy foot driving this vehicle because this engine makes it actually pretty fun. A nice exterior needs a nice interior to match it, and that's exactly what's going on here with the CX70. This is a beautiful place to be, a beautiful piece of design, frankly. You know, a lot of the Japanese models like the Hondas and Toyotas that this sort of competes against are a little more utilitarian. This feels more of the design language of like a German car. It's said to be a little more luxurious. Now, you definitely get that with the Nappa leather seats, and this tan dash even is super cool. You have sort of a suede type material on the dash. Absolutely beautiful to look at. Now, how about the usability of it? Because that's almost as important, right? Well, you do get physical HVAC controls, which is super nice. And these buttons here, specifically for, you know, all your things like your heated seats, your heated steering wheel, your cooled seats, they have a nice tactile feedback to them when you click them. So that's appropriate for, you know, kind of the design. The screen itself is fairly usable. You're kind of encouraged to use the scroll wheel, which feels a bit dated to me, whereas, you know, most vehicles you're using the touch screen. You can touch the screen, just to be clear, but it is very far away. Like, most other screens are a lot closer to you, so you don't have to do the old like lean forward to use it. So that's a little bit annoying, but that said, it does have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, which are both wireless, so it's pretty easy to get along with. All digital gauge cluster like everyone's doing these days. You get a ton of buttons on the steering wheel, but they are, once again, nice to click and pretty usable for using your things like your adaptive cruise control. My only real complaints in here are kind of circling back to the complaints I had for the CX90, is that it's a very noisy vehicle. And let me demonstrate this to you. Not noisy in a road noise perspective or a wind noise perspective, but these beeps. So it is complaining to me. I'm gonna turn this off because I don't want it to go crazy for you this whole segment, but it is complaining because I don't have my seatbelt on. Now, we are parked, sitting still in park, not in drive. I don't know why it should be yelling at you about a seatbelt when you haven't even moved the vehicle. I totally get safety first, and I am a seatbelt user, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't need to yell at me like when I just start the car and I haven't even taken it out of drive. There are just some things like that that can be a little bit annoying. Now, some of the other stuff that I found annoying with this vehicle is when you're driving, there were so many alerts warning you about things that really weren't a problem. We're going to wait to the driving segment to see if they've fixed any of those. Hopefully they did, because they were quite annoying. Now, the seating itself, I did touch on it. This Nappa leather, beautiful material, super soft touch. I mean, it's just super premium, and I like the sort of quilting quality that they have going on here. Not a ton of lateral support going on here, and this car can generate a decent amount of G's, as you'll see in the drive, but it does have lumbar support, which is nice for somebody like me with my crummy back. Now, the back seats, of course, no third row, but the second row, ton of space. Your passengers will be very happy. You can adjust the seat back position. You have a ton of headroom and a ton of knee room, even for me, for someone at 6'1". So even though this is dimensionally identical to the CX90 and you don't get those third row seats, you still have all that room back there behind the second row seats to put stuff. So let's see how a bike fits in the back of the CX70.
Since the CX70 is essentially the CX90, the same complaints exist here. First, the rear hatch doesn't open very high, and I've already hit my head several times on it. If you're over 5'9", this is going to be annoying. Outside of that, the hatch opening isn't wide enough for larger items like my 29er mountain bike. A smaller bike like my road bike fits fine, however. There's ample room lengthwise, it really just depends how wide your handlebars are. And as always, if you enjoy the bike test, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button and leaving a comment below so you don't miss future videos.
Alrighty, so CX70, let's start first with the problems that I had with the CX90 that they've allegedly addressed. And I will say some of them have been addressed, or at least partially. The first one, and the most annoying part of that CX90, is you would constantly get inundated with alerts on this gauge cluster, and there would be a noise that would come through the system. There was all these proximity sensors that would just get these phantom notifications. You'd be driving down the road all by yourself, no one around you, and there were just these proximity sensor alerts going off all the time. Forward collision alerts when that wasn't even possible. Maybe there was, a shadow or something in the road. That has mostly been addressed here. I say mostly because there is still one problem, at least that I have with this alert system, is the frontal collision warning. Of course, I want frontal collision warning to be on. I want to avoid frontal collisions. And it does a good job of that when you're, approaching a car too fast. If you're not paying attention or something, it will warn you so you can brake. The problem comes when you are, say, sitting at a stop sign. You're, coming up to you're sitting at a stop sign. There's a road perpendicular. You're waiting for cars that are going back and forth in front of you, left to right, right to left. And the problem is if you even as so much as ease off the brakes because you're getting ready to go after somebody passes you and you're going at that stop sign, it will warn you that you are about to hit that person. It thinks you're about to go into oncoming traffic and destroy yourself. I've even had it in a certain case where it pulled power, and then I got really in an awkward situation because then I was going for a gap in the traffic. And then because it cut power, then I really was kind of put in an awkward situation. So they still have a little more tuning to do there, but it is much better than it was. I will say that. It was undrivable before with the CX90. Now this is acceptable. The other thing that I have noticed a difference in is in this transmission tuning. This seems to be much smoother than the CX90 at low speed. The CX90 was very herky-jerky. And as well, it does seem a touch faster to respond. That was a problem that I had with the CX90 where it was just like you would put your foot down, it would take forever to do anything. So let me just demonstrate here. Just put my foot down, it was much quicker to respond. Now, speaking of that response, let's talk about the good things that are still here, just like the CX90. I just demonstrated it, but let's do it again. This turbo inline six is a beauty. Definitely the highlight for this vehicle. This vehicle is honestly faster than it needs to be. And that sort of is foreshadowing to when I talk about which version of this vehicle I would recommend. That's a bit of foreshadowing. This Turbo S model, which we're in, it's around $55,000 with destination and stuff. It is so fast. I mean, it has so much torque, especially with that mild hybrid assist. It's a really fun SUV, and subsequently, I'm not getting the best fuel economy because I have a heavy right foot and it's fun to push this vehicle. We already talked about 23 city, 28 highway. I'm getting 22 combined. And I was on a 200-mile road trip with this vehicle. I've put 350 miles on it. I'm averaging 22 miles to the gallon. The fact that I did more than half of the mileage on a road trip, I should be getting a lot better fuel economy than this. It's not horrific, but if you're on it like me, and I mean, any turbocharged car, this is kind of true, right? Turbocharged engines use a lot of fuel, of course, if you're on it. So that is one thing to keep in mind with this engine. It makes so much power, it makes a good noise, but it will suck through fuel, at least relative to the EPA fuel economy numbers. The other complaints or other observations worth noting in this vehicle, the steering is quite heavy in this vehicle, especially at low speed. I don't know why Mazda hasn't lightened up this steering. It's all electronic, right? It's electronically assisted. There's no hydraulic power steering here. There's a motor that is assisting the steering wheel. All they have to do is increase that boost. I say all they have to do like I'm an automotive engineer, but I assume it's not very difficult. But even in these drive modes, I'm in normal driving mode. If I put it here into sport driving mode, which I believe is a Turbo S only thing, you did get a slightly faster throttle response. But the steering, regardless of what mode you're in, is just too heavy for what this vehicle is. Especially if you're just kind of at low speed, there's no reason for this steering to be as heavy as it is, and it just makes the car feel more cumbersome than it actually is. Because it actually does handle pretty well. It's relatively maneuverable. It does have a lot of body roll, but what I will say is that the suspension is still on the firmer side. I do think that is another opportunity for Mazda to soften up the suspension here. I think it would feel more luxurious if they did that, because in its current state, it's a little bit crashy over bumps, and maybe that's partially these 21-inch wheels. So maybe if you put some smaller wheels on this, you would be better off, and it would be able to kind of soak up those imperfections a little more. But right now, it just feels to me like this car is slightly confused. It has specific sporting aspirations with this turbocharged inline six engine. The way the chassis handles in these twisties is really good and neutral, and it actually is a little bit, in some ways, fun to drive, although you do feel the weight in this vehicle. But then it's like, it's not sporty enough to really be like fun, and then it's just kind of annoying most of the time. When you're in a parking lot, the steering is heavy. When you go over bumps on these regular crappy roads, the suspension is too firm. So it's a bit of an odd kind of like personality mashup. Ultimately, it is a nice thing. That's the technical phrase, of course, nice thing. Really consumer advice here. What I mean by that is this feels a lot more premium than, say, like a CR-V or like a RAV4, like something of the Japanese sort of segment where you have a two-row SUV, maybe a three-row SUV. This feels way more upmarket. It feels a lot better put together. And so when we get into like, who is this vehicle for? I think it is somebody who wants to stand out, who doesn't want the run-of-the-mill, Honda Passport or whatever that you see a million of. You can stand out because it's a good-looking vehicle. It's really nicely well made. This gentleman is in oncoming traffic, and I don't know why he's driving that box truck up this mountain. Besides the point. So it's for somebody who wants something different, who wants to stand out, who values design. I do think that I do think that the Turbo S model that I'm in right now is maybe a bit overkill. It's $55,000 because it has 340 horsepower and 300, right around 70 pound-feet of torque. I think this experience would be just as good if you got the base engine. So get the base engine, it has 280 horsepower. It's the same engine, fundamentally. It's a 3.3 liter turbocharged version, but it's, of a lower state of tune, so it doesn't make as much horsepower. And, you still get the same experience. It's much cheaper. You can get this for low $40,000, depending on the niceties that you want. Of course, if you want the Napa leather and, this giant sunroof, you're going to have to pay a little more money, maybe $48,000. But even then, it doesn't seem like too much of a reach when you drive this vehicle. It feels relatively worth that amount of money. The other thing I'll say is that if you want to spend $55,000 on this vehicle, the Turbo S is cool, but maybe consider getting the PHEV. So that they have a plug-in hybrid version of this, which can get you like 26 miles of just electric range before the gas engine kicks on. And that gives you best of both worlds. You have like a range for around town dropping the kids off, but you have gas for when you need to go on longer trips. But it is expensive. It is a lot closer to this $55,000 mark than just say the base engine. So once again, if it was me, I like the styling. I'm going to go maybe for the base model or closer to the base model. Smaller wheels, i.e. better ride. You don't get as much horsepower, but who's drag racing in a 2-row SUV anyways? Last thing I'll say is it's a bit of an odd car, right? Like, it's basically the same as the CX90. Obviously, it's been a little updated now, but it really just boils down to, do you need a 2-row SUV that is this big? This is a very large vehicle. I'm anticipating most people to opt for the CX90 because it's the same vehicle and you get a third row of seats. So up to you whether you need that third row of seats or not. I do think that this is a pretty cool car. Like I said, being that it is different than most of the other ones, and I do think Mazda is going to continue to, tune it, and I think they have a little bit of room for opportunity here to make this thing even better. If you made it this far in the video, guys, I very much appreciate it. Consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Let me know what you think of the CX70. Does it have a place in the world with the CX90 or not? Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.